Often, the most successful movies are those with the most straightforward concepts. Ones which the whole plot can be surmised in a short sentence or simply in its title. Movies like Jurassic Park ask, what if we could clone dinosaurs? And Toy Story asks, what if toys were alive? These are known as high concept, as they are easy to sell and market, and the ones that are less definable are known as low concept. However, there are some movies which start off simple but become needlessly complicated as the movie goes on. I'm Chris Hall, and today I bring you Total Reality. Total Reality is a 1997 sci-fi movie and a headache waiting to happen. Total Reality stars David Bradley in one of his final roles before retiring from acting as Anthony Rand, who is a soldier from the far future which is ruled by an evil empire known as the Bridges. When attacking a rebel ship to capture the vaguely evil and vaguely European Commander Tunis, played by Tonis Krenchman, Rand saves two small children, but because his commanding officer is a not very nice man, he blows up the ship, killing the children and everybody on board. Well, apart from Tunis and his bodyguard, who have escaped using a time machine to travel to the past and to kill the founder of the Bridgist movement and stop the deaths of billions of people in the future. Naturally, Rand isn't too pleased that the children were killed and kills his commanding officer, whereafter he's sent to prison, where he meets a range of characters who I honestly don't know the names of, so let's move on. Rand and the rest of the inmates are sent back in time to prevent Tunis from killing the Bridgist founder and being pardoned for their war crimes. So they're going back in time to kill the bad guy who's going to kill the bad guy who isn't bad, but the real bad guy is him, and the bad guy who's killing the bad guy isn't bad, and the bad guy is supposed to be killing originally isn't bad, but the bad guy is supposed to be killing really is bad because he's a really bad man who's a bad guy because he got... Oh, my head!
I never trusted her.
Okay, let's focus on the performances for now and tackle the story once I can no longer taste copper.
It's a Turk!
Performance-wise, we have a very solid, very competent group of actors who all do their job very, very well. Some are better than others, and the two best within this movie have to be our hero and our villain. Our villain in this movie isn't some kind of evil, megalomaniac, moustache-twirling supervillain who's trying to take over the world. He's merely a guy who honestly and wholeheartedly believes that what he's doing is the best course of action. And although his methods may be a little bit dubious and a little bit morally grey here and there, ultimately he believes that what he's doing will save humanity in the future. And our hero is just your average guy off the street, which itself may just sound like a little bit of an insult, but it really isn't. He is the everyman. He's just your common or garden variety guy off the street who is thrown into circumstances which are beyond his control. And in this movie, he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. It's kind of like John McClane from the Die Hard movies. Well, apart from the recent one where he's walking around Chernobyl without a radiation suit, or the one where he's having the fist fight on the wing of a moving plane, or the one where he's jumping out of helicopters, or the one where he's jumping off a bridge onto a moving boat. You know, apart from those, he's just like John McClane.
I'll just send somebody else.
And let us die.
What do you want from me? I just work here.
Story-wise, imagine the Terminator, but instead of Kyle Reese going back in time to prevent the death of Sarah Connor, he's going back in time to prevent the death of the guy who created Skynet. That's an interesting little moral dilemma for our hero, as that means that he's going back in time to protect somebody who, in all reality, he'd much rather kill. And if he killed them, it would save the lives of billions of people in the future. It's kind of like someone going back in time to protect Adolf Hitler, and that's a really, really interesting plot point. But sadly, the writers of this movie seemingly felt that that wasn't enough, and they had to add more layers to it to make it more complex and intriguing. But all that really does is muddy the waters and makes it a hell of a lot more harder to follow.
Nuclear war.
And then the Bridges declare the country under martial law. The Constitution is suspended, and Jerry is president for life. Now we have Tunis here after Bridges and Jerry.
You're talking about things that are in the future, things that haven't happened yet.
Believe me.
As the story goes on, we learn that the guy that the bad guy went back in time to kill isn't the target, but the real target is the congressman who we see briefly towards the start of the movie. But then it turns out they're not actually going to kill the congressman, but swap bodies with him. As it turns out that they removed their implants earlier on within the movie. As it turns out that removing their implants limits their lifespan to only 1 week. So they're going to swap bodies with the congressman and presumably the founder of the Bridges movement, so they can ensure that future history doesn't go to pot. Maybe. They don't actually say that's their motivations for swapping bodies with him, even though just killing them will get the job just done just as quickly and ensure that future history doesn't turn out the way it does. I mean, this entire story, when we get down to it, is so bloody convoluted, it makes the Metal Gear games look easy to follow.
They ripped out their implants!
Plus you got to deal with the fact that our bad guy in all this isn't really a bad guy. He's not some evil megalomaniac supervillain who's trying to take over the world. He's travelling back in time to save the lives of billions of people in the future and preventing a nuclear war that destroys the Earth. He's travelling back in time using a method that's never been tested before. And when he gets back to the past, he destroys his time machine to prevent any temptation of returning to the future before the task at hand is completed. He risks life and limb at every turn, and he's willing to make the ultimate sacrifice if it means saving billions of people in the future. This makes for a very great, very brilliant moral dilemma to this movie. It means that our hero and villain, at the end of the day, aren't really hero and villain. They're just two sides of the same coin. And it makes for a great experience overall, but sadly, for whatever reason, the makers of this movie decided, towards the end of the movie, to make him evil.
It would have been better if we could have worked together.
And do what?
Both our hero and villain are good guys underneath, and it's only out of circumstance that they're fighting one another. In another life they may well have been allies. Hell, in the rewritten timeline, they may have their own YouTube show together. So it makes no real sense for the makers of this movie to decide that, towards the end of it, to make our bad guy so evil, when his motivation is pure, when he's never really done anything out and out evil. So it means that anything he does after that point makes no real sense for either the story, his motivation, or his character. And yes, with that clip that I just showed you, he is threatening to kill the good guy, but he's really just doing that because he doesn't want the mission to go arse over tit. He's doing this to prevent the deaths of billions of people in the future. And even then, from the hero's cack-handed intervention, when the senator dies, for whatever reason, the two of them decide to have the big epic showdown on the bridge. Why? With the death of the congressman, future history has been altered, and there's nothing that our hero or villain can do now to change that. What has happened, and what will be, que sera, sera, and all the rest. So there's no real purpose for these two to have the big fight at the end, as it will achieve absolutely nothing. So unless this is some kind of great big macho cock measuring match, there's no reason for it to happen. It's almost like, no, I do know why this fight is happening. It's because a movie like this needs a great big action sequence to end the movie. Right, guys?
You just saw what I just saw.
Yeah, I just saw what you just saw.
Now I'm going to talk about the ending, and I don't usually do this, but if you don't want the ending spoiled for you, just jump to this time code over here or wherever it is that I've got it, and I'll just go straight forward to the conclusion. You don't have to watch this bit if you don't want to, but if you want to, then keep watching. If not, the time code wherever the hell it is. So okay, so this is your last call. Everybody ready? Okay, let us talk about the ending. So whilst our hero and villain are having the most fruitless fight in film history, our heroine falls off the bridge and lands in the river. Our hero dives in to save her, and then they make their way back to the ship. However, it turns out the hero is too late and is trapped in the past. He takes her to a nearby cabin and tries to revive her. Sometime later he goes outside and this happens.
What are you doing?
Goodbye.
Okay, congratulations, movie. You have managed to take your story to its most logical conclusions, and you know what, that's great. I take my hat off to you. It's really refreshing to see a movie actually doing this. I mean, all too often when we have stories where the hero is working to some very arbitrary time constraint, you know, like 24 hours, we usually have a situation where at about 23 hours and 59 minutes, when all hope seems lost, suddenly something will come along and save the day. Here we don't get that, and I really love that. That shows some maturity and some sense within your story writing. I like that. Once again, fantastic. I take my hat off again, but I've already taken it off. But there's just one thing, no, two things, three things that bug me about the ending. For a start, let's just take a look at just before the hero dives into the water to save the heroine. Now let's take a look at a shot of the hero and the heroine when they're coming out the water. Seems to be a little bit of a difference there. So that leads me on to my first question. How long did these two spend underwater? Okay, so seeing as this movie is set around the winter months and the sun tends to set around 5 o'clock in the evening, and the sunset time at the time of writing this review in Portland, Oregon is 4:27, and the sunrise time is 7:39. Now let's say for it to get as dark as it is in the first clip, it takes about an hour, so that would make that time about 5:27. And for it to get that bright, I myself would say that it'd probably take around 10 AM, but let's be fair and add an hour to that. So our current times are 5:27 and 8:39. Now let's say that the last possible point for it to be as dark as it is in the first clip is about an hour before sunrise, so that would make it 6:39. So that would mean that the longest the pair of them could have been underwater is around 15 hours and 12 minutes, or at the very least 2 hours. Now, the average human in sub-zero waters can survive around 10 to 20 minutes. So needless to say, both our hero and villain, had they been in the water for as long as either of those two times, they're mighty brown bread. Plus, when you bear in mind that the ship they're supposed to travel in landed somewhere around Coos Bay, according to the fancy military computers, and that the bridge they have the big final fight on is the Hawthorne Bridge, and even though we don't know exactly where the ship landed or where exactly they came up out of the water from, a general journey between those two locations would have taken around 3 hours and 49 minutes. So that means that entire process, from them having the big fist fight, from her falling into the water and him saving her, and them travelling back to the ship, that entire process could have taken anywhere between 5 hours and 49 minutes or 18 hours and 12 minutes. So not only need this fight not have happened, as it would have achieved absolutely nothing either way, it takes so long that it ultimately results in our hero's death. My second question is, what does this ending actually achieve? So, the big theme for the end of this movie is sacrifice. Our bad guy has sacrificed himself for the good of humanity, and our hero is going to sacrifice himself for... who exactly? I mean, you could say that he's sacrificing himself for the girl that he's with, though they didn't really have much of a relationship to begin with, so you can't say it's out of love or companionship or anything like that, but I suppose you could say it's because the implant itself could explode and kill them both, or he simply doesn't want her to see the sight of his exploded head all over the cabin room. Which, yeah, I can get behind, though I suppose the real motivation would be for him to do the right thing. Which I can get behind, but really, if doing the right thing was the true motivation behind this sequence, then where was that thought leading up to the final fight? The final point is that after the timeline has been altered and the last surviving member of Rand's unit returns to the future, we soon learn that humanity has turned into a whole grain cereal advert, and thereafter we discover that the implants that have been troubling our hero for oh so very long no longer exist. So, if they don't exist now, why is it they existed in the past? I mean, the death of the congressman should have meant that they no longer existed at all, so our hero shouldn't have to worry about these kind of things. And yes, that would mean that we wouldn't have had such a fairly decent ending, but still, that would have at least made some kind of sense. And I mean, yes, granted, the whole going back in time and changing major events probably has greater ramifications than this movie's actually implying, but you know what, if the movie isn't going to explain it, then I'll be damned if I'm going to have to do it.
Alright, just give me the gun.
So the big question, can I recommend it? Well, on balance, I'm going to have to say no. This movie had the promise of an interesting setup, and for the most part looked as though it's going to see that through to the end. But sadly, as time goes by, its narrative twists and turns and squanders that promise on a story that ultimately hasn't got the will to stick to its guns in having a more novel and morally interesting story, and a bad guy who is more than just an evil genius, but is someone who has depth, who is ultimately trying to do the right thing in the end. And instead it throws all that away for a cliched final showdown that should never have happened, both in terms of logic and the story itself. Which is a damn shame, as there's some really great ideas within this movie. Seeing how a small self-help movement becomes a galaxy-wide religion is clever, and both our lead and our villain pull some great performances within the movie, but sadly these things aren't enough to save this movie, which is a real shame. To be honest with you, this was a very difficult movie to determine whether or not I was going to recommend it to you. As watching it the second time, I thoroughly enjoyed it, though it is still a fairly confusing movie at the best of times. But if you want to watch it, then watch it by all means. It's not offensive or annoying or aggravating, it's just a little mixed up. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go travel back in time to prevent the creation of the Nativity movies. Goodbye!
What do you want from me? I just work here.